Respected Chairman, sir, respected judges, and my dear colleagues. My topic is fractured distal humerus prevention of complications. My sincere gratitude to our past president, Professor Bakshi. Basically, distal humerus fractures are the uncommon injury. This constitutes less than 2% of the all adult fracture. It has got bimodal age distribution, and it is one of the most complicated and the challenging injury. So, what is the treatment outcome? How we can get the best result? So earlier in the past, it was conservative because of the poor technique and quality of fixation, but now the goal has changed to get a better result and finally to get stable, mobile, and pain-free elbow. So first, if you want to correct the complications, you have to know what we want to know the complications. What are the basic complications? These are enumerated as such: malunion, stiffness, non-union, heterotopic ossifications. However, heart valve failure, vascular necrosis, and infection. Although it is very superfluous to say that all complications are preventable, however, most of the complications can be prevented if we follow a standard regimen. So, what is the history? Basically, Eastwood in 1937 he described bag of bones techniques, and most important is the Riceborough and Radin, who in 1969 described the limitations of the operative intervention. And next, finally, early 60s, EVO group came. So, what is the basic anatomy? What is the applied anatomy of the elbow? Elbow is a modified hinge joint with three separate articulations: radiocapitular, radioulnar and trochlear, proximal radioulnar. Movements are the flexion 0 to 150, and the rotational movements are 85-degree. Function to convey hand to head and mouth, and to perineum and legs, and to variety of working position at bench, desk, and other things. And the lateral column is approx 20-degree valgus relative to shaft. Capitulum is angulated 30 to 40-degree anteriorly. Medial column aligned 40-degree to the shaft and end in trochlea, and trochlea is angulated 25-degree anteriorly. So these are the basic classification. One classification, the EVO classification, but we didn't follow the that one. I followed the Riceborough and Radin classification. So why it's a matter of interest? Because it is difficult to reduce, it is difficult to hold in anatomical position, it is difficult to fix, and it is difficult to heal. So lastly, there is some residual deformity may persist. So what are the difficulties of treatment? Why it is difficult? It is because of the complex shape of the elbow. It is because of the adjacent neurovascular architecture. It is because of the sparse soft tissue envelope. So ultimately, what is our objective? It is precise reconstruction of the articular surfaces. There has to be proper alignment. There has to be stable and rigid internal fixation to require early motion, and finally repair of the all concomitant lesions. So we can very rightly said, those who fail to plan really plan to fail. So this is the case study. I had 31 cases, 2 had been type 4 and 3 had been 27 cases, and majority had been operated within 1 to 3 weeks, but ideally it should be done as early as possible. And the surgery has been performed by the posterior transolecranon approach. So what is the diagnosis? How you can diagnose? By the routine investigations, by the X-ray, elbow, epilateral and oblique in complex injuries. We have to take some traction views for the better visualization of the fracture lines and fragments. 3D CT to further analyze fracture pattern, and Doppler ultrasound or angiography to know the vascular status. So it is very rightly Morgan has said that decision is more important than the incision. So this is the procedure under brachial anesthesia, under pneumatic, as proximal on the brachium. We have to position the patient in the lateral decubitus position with a sandbag for support and padded sterile arm hold under proximal humerus. Shoulder at 90-degree abduction with elbow flexed over the arm holder to give the access for the bone grafting if required. And we have to expose posteriorly 5 to 10 centimeters distal to the tip of the olecranon. It has to be extended proximally, medial to midline of elbow, 10 to 20 centimeters above the olecranon tip. We must have to identify the olecranon nerve, ulnar nerve, and we have to protect it. Expose distal humerus after osteotomy, distal to the articular olecranon. Osteotomy, transverse or chevron is preferably done. Same incision can be done for the total elbow arthroplasty. This is the procedure. We have to fix the condyles to make it supracondylar. Then we fix the reassembled condyles to the humeral metaphysis. There are 2 plates, lateral column and medial column. We have to apply the plates. We must avoid the screws, which approach the articular processes and the fossa. And then 2 recon plates are used. In open cases, we had 2 cases in which we had just used the interfragmentary screws with the KOIs. And it has been temporarily fixed with the KOIs. And olecranon osteotomy, there had been two cases with which are compound which has been fixed with a square nail. Total elbow arthroplasty was done in 2 cases that all had been type 4. So what is the follow-up? Post-operative active mobilization is done on the second day, immediate post-op X-ray, every 6 weeks up to 6 months, up to minimum 18 to 24 months, and passive range of motion after 6 weeks. Further physiotherapy advised as per individualistic effort. So how we can assess the results? It is as per the criteria laid down by the Flynn at all using Rice-Brown grading system. Then the criteria are rate of healing of fractures, stability at the elbow joint, degree of alignment, range of motion, pain, and any other complications. So this is the system, Flynn criteria. Our series has been excellent 16, and finally poor had been 5 cases. So this is the first case operated with the interfragmentary screw with the 2 plates. This is the range of movement after 3 months. This is the second case, same done in the same way. This is the range of movement after 4 months. This is the third case. This patient had a follow-up at a later date. He came after 6 months. This is the fourth case in which this is a type 4, in which primarily it was fixed with the multiple K wires. And in a couple of more than around 5 to 6 months, all wires came out. And finally, total elbow prosthesis, total elbow arthroplasty was done. And this is the procedure after 8 months. This lady was actually it was a case of polytrauma. She had also a comminuted supracondylar femur, and that was treated conservatively. So I have to operate again for the supracondylar femur, and I also performed the total elbow arthroplasty, although it was totally complementary. This is the fifth case. This is the range of movement. In this case, it was a compound intercondylar fracture humerus. So it was fixed with the interfragmentary screw and the 2 K wires, and ultimately it has a very bad result. So the complications in my series had been stiffness in 6 cases, superficial infection in 2 cases, deep in 1, deformity in 4 cases, neuropraxia, ulnar nerve in 2 cases, which later on got resolved. But still, the anterior transposition of the ulnar nerve is a controversial aspect, whether it should be done or it should not be done. Non-union sternotomy in 1 case, subcutaneous prominence of the hardware in 2 cases, and non-union in 1 cases. One of the topic is the heterotopic ossification. That is one of the important complications. What are the primary causes for this ossification? These are head injury, polytrauma, severe soft tissue injury, delay in surgical intervention. So we have to try to do the surgery as early as possible. And next is the prolonged immobilization. And finally, the open fracture is one of the reasons. So primarily we can prevent this ossification by indomethacin, bisphonates, and the radiation. So finally, to conclude, I can say the range of movement in our series was 110 to 140 degree. Overall results had been satisfactory in majority of the cases, and 1 non-union was reported. So the message is, it really poses a problem. Preoperative and honest evaluation and planning is very essential. Anatomical reduction and absolute stability are the vital pillars of fixation. Immobilization again leads to stiffness. Immobilization after fracture fixation leads to more stiffness, and early return of the elbow movement to reach the goal, which I have told very earlier, that is good ADL and minimum of the complications. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pawan Kumar. Now fracture distal humerus is open for discussion.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Actually, yes, if you follow the standard regimen of surgery, and so if you want to prevent the non-union, you have to do the surgery in a nice way. You have to do if you want to prevent the non-union, you have to prevent the malunion. If the surgery is performed in a nice way, if the surgery is performed well, you can ultimately the complication can be prevented. One of the complications that was heterotopic ossification was to be dealt, so that I mentioned in detail.
Next question.
No. KYR I performed in the compound cases. We had 2 cases in which I had to do one interfragmentary screw with the 2 KYs. That was the very compound. It was there was a lacerated wound around 4 by 3 centimeter. Total number was 31. No, other cases I had no complications. Yes. No, I've enumerated the complications. Yeah. Right, right. 19. So in other cases, basically the result has been good, rather fair. So I do not enumerate it in this series. No, I followed the Flynn et al. Criteria. I followed this criteria.
Thank you, Dr. Pawan. Our next speaker is Dr. Saurabh.
Yes, I followed
Saurabh.
this criteria.
Thank you, Dr. Pawan.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Yes, please.
Honorable judges, respected chairpersons, esteemed seniors, and my dear colleagues, I would like to begin my presentation entitled, sorry, sir. How can I switch it? So, sir, there's some problem. No, which way? I will go back. Sorry for the disturbance. I would like to begin my presentation entitled Type 3 acromioclavicular joint dislocations is combined intra-articular K-wire and coracoclavicular screw fixation better than the non-operative management. Acromioclavicular joint dislocations are among the most common dislocations seen by orthopedic surgeons. The most common mode is direct trauma to shoulder due to fall on shoulder, which subsequently leads to very high incidence of acromioclavicular joint dislocations among shoulder injuries. These dislocations may not look as alarming as a shoulder dislocation, but they do have a very high morbidity rate. The most common classification system followed is the Rockwood classification system, in which type 1 and type 2 are ligament sprains, type 3 in which the ligaments are completely torn, whereas type 4, 5, and 6 and increasing displacement of clavicle. Like any orthopedic problem, both non-operative and operative management options are available. Among the non-operative options, we have slings and various types of bandages to manage these cases, whereas in the operative, for operative intervention, we can have intra-articular fixation with K-wires or Steinman pins and extra-articular coracoclavicular repairs with screws, Dacron or Marcelin tapes, and we can also go for ligament reconstruction procedures like Weaver-Dunn procedure. With the aim to restore normal, full-strength, pain-free function of shoulder, the Rockwood type 1 and 2 dislocations are universally managed conservatively, whereas type 4, 5, and 6 are universal indication for operative intervention. However, the Rockwood type 3 injury, where the ligaments are completely torn without much displacement of clavicle, the treatment protocols are still controversial, with proponents of both non-operative and operative interventions. So with the aim to compare the outcomes of combined intra-articular K-wire fixation and extra-articular coracoclavicular screw repair against the non-operative management for type 3 AC joint dislocations, we conducted a 28-month-long randomized controlled clinical trial at the Department of Orthopedics of a tertiary care center. The cases were diagnosed on the basis of history, clinical, and radiographic examination. The study included 20 to 50-year-old patients with acute type 3 closed AC joint dislocation without any associated injury or abnormal upper limb function. The cases were randomized into two groups, operative and non-operative. For the non-operative treatment, the patients were given oral analgesics and arm sling for about 2 to 3 weeks. Shoulder physiotherapy with pendulum exercises was instituted as soon as possible. However, heavy weight lifting, overhead abduction, and active sports participation was not allowed for at least 12 weeks or till there was no joint tenderness. For operative intervention, the joint was approached through a curved incision over the top of shoulder. After thorough debridement and open reduction, the joint was fixed with 2 K-wires given from acromion to clavicle. And finally, the joint was coracoclavicular repair was performed with a 4.5 mm cannulated cancel screw. In the final thing, the joint capsule was repaired and the wound was closed over a suction drain, which was removed after 24 hours. In the post-operative period, all the patients received appropriate antibiotics and analgesics. K-wire was removed at 4 weeks and the screw was removed after 12 weeks. shoulder physiotherapy was instituted as soon as possible. However, again, the heavy weightlifting, overhead abduction, and active sports participation was restricted for at least 12 weeks or till the removal of screw. All the cases were evaluated clinically and radiographically at monthly intervals. For functional outcome analysis, we used the constant shoulder score. The statistical analysis was performed by the blinded investigator using unpaired t-test. Initially, 196 cases were assessed for eligibility into the study. However, in the final analysis, we had 25 cases in the operative group and 29 in the non-operative group. It was observed that most of the cases belonged to the belonged to the age group of 21 to 40 years, and about 63% of them were males. However, both the groups were statistically identical in terms of age and gender distribution of the patients. Average injury intervention interval was about 2.9 days without any significant difference between the two groups. The mean follow-up period was 22 months, ranging from 15 to 18 months, 28 months. This is the case of 30-year-old male with right-sided AC joint dislocation, which is fixed operatively using K-wire and correcoclavicular screw. Another case of 32-year-old male with right AC joint dislocation, again managed operatively. This is the 43-year-old female case with the left joint acromioclavicular joint dislocation, managed operatively with the screw and 2 K-wires. Upon functional outcome analysis using constant shoulder score, we observed that the operatively managed cases did significantly better in the earlier part of the study. They showed statistically significant improvement starting from the 4th week, which lasted till 6 months. However, after 1 year, both the groups, the difference between the scores decreased, and it was only marginal and non-significant. Evaluating shoulder range of motion at 6 months, most of the patients in the operative group reached near full normal range of motion of shoulder abduction at about 6 months, whereas non-operative group took much longer. In the non-operative group, the most common complication was intermittent shoulder pain, which was observed in about 62% of the patients. However, it was mild and relieved by rest and mild analgesics. Another common complication was cosmetic deformity, for which about 52% of the patients were consulted and given appropriate treatment. And about 6 patients, that is 21% patients, were not satisfied with the shoulder function and appearance and finally underwent late clavicle resection. In the operative group, the most common complication was implant failure, which was seen in 2 cases, that is 8% of cases, out of which 1 had distal clavicle osteolysis. Another minor complication was superficial stitch infection, which was seen in 1 case, and heterotopic ossification was a radiological finding, which was observed in 2 cases in the operative group. Overall complication rate was about 69% in the non-operative group and about 20% in the operative group. The difference was statistically very significant. There is no doubt that acromioclavicular young and no labors. And if these are not treated adequately, they can have very high morbidity and serious quality of life issues. The treatment protocols and management protocols still remain controversial, with the proponents of way, whereas the proponents of operative management claiming the advantages of better restoration of joint anatomy and subsequently improved functional outcomes. However, despite various studies have been conducted to compare this thing and find out a solution, but still most of the studies lack a consistency in terms of the protocols used and the methods used and the treatment protocols, and so we cannot achieve a final conclusion. In this study, we found out that the fixation with K-wire and CC screw, correcoclavicular screw, was superior in terms of better restoration of joint anatomy, faster healing rates, less complication rates, and small rehabilitation periods. However, the only disadvantage we found was the initial cost, which were very high due to 3 interventions, one for implant fixation and another for implant removal. In terms of functional outcomes, the operatively managed cases did very well, significantly well as compared to the non-operative cases in the early period, so that they were rehabilitated at a shorter time interval and returned to their daily routine activities at a much shorter period as compared to the non-operative group. However, after 1 year, both the methods gave excellent results. This study was unique that there's no doubt about that the acromioclavicular joint ligament structures are very important. The correcoclavicular ligament, which is the main ligament, assists in weight transmission across the joint. And in dislocations where this is ruptured, the treatment should aim toward repair or reconstruction of this ligament. The basic idea behind correcoclavicular repair is to decrease the gap between coracoid process and clavicle, so that to oppose the torn edges of ligament, which will help the healing process. However, the single screw is very less effective in tolerating the heavy stresses across the joint. So the combination of intra-articular fixation with extra-articular fixation was able to give an accurate joint reduction with a more rigid fixation and less chances of implant failure and subsequently better outcomes. Despite the best efforts of the authors, the study has certain pitfalls like small study group and short follow period. Improved technology, changing lifestyles have made it obvious that the for acromioclavicular joint should be perfect for proper shoulder biomechanics. And it can be said that the type 3 AC dislocations can be managed in a better way if you use the K-wire and the CC screw combination.
Thank you, Dr. Saurav.
Thank you.
Now this paper is open for discussion.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So we did check it for dominance. So the basic function of shoulder joint, the patients we came across in our study were most of the manual laborers, and the basic function that they do is the weightlifting thing. So it doesn't matter which hand they are using for lifting the weights. So we did study the dominance, but dominance was not an important factor when in terms of constant shoulder score. The scores were poor without reference to the dominance of the hand, whether the patient is right-handed or left-handed. No, sir. No, sir. No, sir. We use the clinical examination part. We try to stress we put the stress clinically on the joint, on the limb, upper limb. Yes, sir. It's a painful thing. So basically, the radiography was first done to evaluate whether if there is flank dislocation, is it type 4 or type 3, and then. So no. Generally, test views were not done, and.
How many of your patients have, muscular fitness very important.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You didn't have a technical problem.
Uh,
What happened that putting that, getting that fit so perfectly?
so actually, I'm not in the right position to answer this question because the surgeries were performed
Okay,
by
next
the
question, please.
professors and.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Yes, sir. It's a pull-out, sir. No, sir. We removed the CC screw after 12 weeks, after 3 months. Yes, sir. Because the patients were on a rehabilitation program, all the patients, so we didn't see any complication of redislocation or reappearance of deformity.
Yes, last question. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. No, sir. We didn't manipulate, sir. No, sir. We never do it. Till 3 months, we don't allow patient any overhead abduction. Yes, sir. So we generally, sir, the surgeons who perform the surgery remove the screws generally in the outdoor setting generally. In an outdoor setting, in the emergency setting or outdoor setting, they didn't go for the manipulation things and they didn't have to go
Okay,
for
thank you, Dr. Saurav.
Thank you, sir.
Our next speaker is Dr. Javed.
Very good afternoon to the chairperson, senior teachers, and my dear colleagues. I am Dr. Javed from Rex Ortho Hospital, Coimbatore. Today I am presenting a paper on safe corridor for K-wiring phalangeal fractures. Metacarpal and phalangeal fractures are the most common fracture of upper extremity. As we all know, usually stable fractures are treated conservatively and unstable fracture requires surgical fixation. So K-wiring is the most common method of fracture fixation of the small bones of hand. But the results of K-wiring are unpredictable. We get certain fortunate patient to have good functional outcome and certain unfortunate patient to have bad result. For example, stiffness and pain, which is the most common complication we encounter. It can be due to improper fixation or can be done radiologically correct but stiff finger functionally. So what went wrong, or what is the technique to do K-wiring of phalangeal fracture? When we looked into the literature, the desirable way of K-wire fixation has not been standardized. This prompted us to do a pilot cadaveric study to define the safe corridor for phalangeal K-wire fixation. And we mapped in cadaver the safe corridor for phalangeal K-wiring in extension and in flexion for each phalanx. And we implemented this in our clinical practice. So aim of our study is to assess the functional outcome in K-wire fixation using the safe corridor. Our inclusion criteria was unstable fracture, fracture with rotational angular deformity, multiple phalangeal fracture in same hand, avulsion fractures. We excluded open fracture, extremes of ages, comorbid disease patient, polytrauma, ipsilateral arm fracture. So according to our inclusion criteria, in our study group of 86 patients, we included 50 patients with 64 phalangeal fractures, predominantly male of working age group, with most common cause being the road traffic and industrial accident. 20% had multiple digital fracture. We followed these patients for minimum of 1 year duration and maximum of 2 years. The most common finger involved was the little finger followed by ring and thumb being the least. We most commonly encountered transverse and spiral variety of fractures. Most common part involved was base followed by shaft, neck and head. Proximal phalanx was the most commonly fractured phalanx followed by distal, and middle was the least commonly involved. So in our group, we strictly followed the protocol of safe corridor entry of K-wire, on-table active finger range of motion test, and post-op immediate active range of motion exercise from day one. So as the safe green corridors are as marked in the picture, the only exemption being the avulsion fracture, which needs direct or indirect fixation. We graded our results on the basis of Belsky's criteria, which include mainly pain, deformity, total active movement, and grip strength, and categorized into excellent, good, and poor. We'll see some surgical technique for proximal phalanx. The base of the proximal phalanx can be easily elevated and seen as a depression by the side of the extensor tendon. This is an example of PPX base fracture fixed through the safe corridor, and on-table active finger movement has been tested to rule out any soft tissue tethering. This is an example of mid-shaft PPX fracture fixed in similar way. This is an example of comminuted PPX fracture fixed through the safe corridor and 4-week post-op showing the good functional outcome. The technique showing the how to reduce the long spiral fracture fixing through the safe corridor and on-table active movement test with 9 months follow-up showing the excellent outcome. Another example of long oblique fracture PPX fixed through the head of the PPX, which is a safe corridor. Another example transfixed through the safe corridor and 3 months post-op showing the excellent outcome. Moving to the middle phalanx, this is the example of unstable MPX base fracture or displaced MPX base fracture, which has been fixed through the tip of the DPX intramedullary. This is the example of central slip avulsion fracture, which has been fixed directly. This is an example of central slip avulsion fracture with botonial deformity. So, which means there is associated soft tissue damage. So, in this, the fragment has been fixed directly and the joint has been transfixed. So, there is a soft tissue heal in safe position. This is another closed botonial deformity in which the joint has been transfixed and on table active DIP movement has been checked, which is very important for functional outcome. This is an example of olar plate avulsion fracture with dorsal subluxation, as you can see in the picture. So in this, the reduction has been indirectly achieved by putting an extension block K-wire, and on-table flexion has been checked. This is the example of MPX neck fracture fixed through the tip of the DPX and 2 weeks post-op showing the full active movements of adjacent joint. This is the example of unicondylar head fracture MPX fixed through the head of a MPX, which is a safe corridor. Now, this is the example of comminuted base fracture MPX with dislocation. So, best way to fix these type of fracture with using K-wire is to reduce and follow the principle of ligamentotaxis, so that the fragment fall in place and heal in safe position. We can fix through the tip of the DPX and directly. Moving to the distal phalanx, this is an example of DPX fracture fixed through the tip of the DPX. This is an example of mallet avulsion fracture, which has been indirectly reduced by transfixing the DIP joint. We will see some example of multiple phalangeal fracture. The picture showing the PPX fracture. Exactly, sir. The presentation is just a picture presentation, sir. We have already defined the safe corridor and we are publishing. Sir, as definitely, sir, with all your due respect, this is just a paper PowerPoint presentation. Sir. Yes, sir. Sir, actually we are publishing this paper, sir. It is in the process of publishing.
Javed, it is very difficult to understand how the results were better in 98% of cases.
Excellent, 98%.
Excellent.
Yes, sir.
Do you think is it possible?
Yes, sir. We got in our series, and we are following the same protocol till date.
Any questions? Yes, please.
So as I said, sir, in my first slides, rotationally unstable fracture with more angulation, when we fix usually more than convert. And using 2K wires give me more rotational stability, so that I can start my immediate post-op exercise from day one.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Javed. Our next speaker is Dr. Jairam Raju.
Respected Chairman and dear friends, proximal humerus fracture, as you all know, it's a difficult fractures to treat, and 3 and 4 part fractures, which are managed by an indirect reduction technique, is one of the which I'm going to talk with the radiological and functional correlation. Indirect reduction, I mean, you have to achieve a joint alignment, tuberosity reduction, and shaft alignment and fixation without opening any of the soft tissues. Here, once the deltopectoral approach is done, and once we are going through the fracture site, and then once the fracture site is entered, this video is not working. Once the fracture site is entered, and then we secure all the fragments together, and then hold it in position, and then fix it. So with this, even if you start like that, and then you can end up with the fixation, which is an excellent, and this can be achieved in a head-splitting fracture situations, and also in a situation where there is a posterior subluxation, where a burst fracture situations, again you can achieve an indirect reduction and get a good fixation. And also if there is an axillary extrusion, again you can have a joystick maneuver and then get it in position and then fix it. And all of them can have a good results. My aim is to evaluate the surgical reduction accuracy by this using a joystick maneuver, and also compare it with the radiological parameters with the functional outcome. I studied 127 patients from 2008 to 2010, everything operated by me, with the mean age of 53.8 years, and then males were predominant in my series, and then the right sided was more in 74 patients, and then as you all know, the road traffic accident constitutes the major part. If you take the varus and the valgus group with the part of the fractures, it was 66 were 3 part and 61 were the 4 part. And then the osteoporotic segment was measured by the cortical thickness at the surgical neck level. If it is less than 3.5 millimeter, it was supposed to be an osteoporotic bone stock. Valgus and varus, if you look, it is the 57 and the 53 patients in each section, and then axillary extrusion was seen in 7 patients. As you all know, the greater tuberosity is displaced, and which is more often displaced, it is in 60 patients. And then as usual, that 30% of them had a comorbidities, and then the obesity constituted in 18% of the patients. All had a deltopectoral approach, and then 93 of them had a Philos locking plate in these patients. This is a patient where it's a valgus impacted fractures. Once it is reduced, and then he has got a good reduction, and then he has got a good function. This is again another patient where you have a good reduction in these situations and then get a good function. And again you see this is a head splitting fracture with acromion fracture. Once you reduce it well, and then he has got a good function. So if you look at these, all the 127 patients were analyzed, and then the radiological outcome we analyzed was the head shaft angle, which was the head in alignment with the shaft, and then the lateral offset, which was measured from the base of the coracoid to the outermost aspect of the humerus, and then the articular margin to the greater tuberosity and the plate. All these were measured, and then the functional outcome was analyzed with the constant score, and then the DASH score, where it has got 30 questionnaire, and more than 40 was found to be a poor outcome. When we compared the radiological outcome to the normalcy, we were almost able to get into all these fractures into normal angle, but however, when the statistician we asked, it was not found to be very corroborative. All of them had a good union, and then no infection was seen in. If you, of the 127 patients, 111 patients we could get a normal alignment, whereas there was no implant-related differences. And the complication was that 14% of them had a remained varus position, and then one of them had an avascular necrosis. This is a patient with avascular necrosis, but again, he was not having any pain, but had a good function. So the functional outcome, if you take the dash score and the constant, if you put all of them together, they had a good functional outcome. And on comparative analysis to the world literature, except for the transosseous wire that has been reported, we had almost equally on par results. The interesting finding that I noticed in these patients was abnormal scapulothoracic rhythm that was seen in 26 patients, of which 16 of them had a poor radiological outcome, whereas those who had a normal alignment also had 10 patients of them had functionally poor results. So when I analyzed them further, these are the abnormal scapulothoracic rhythm in a patient who had a normal radiological outcome. And again, you see this, he has got a normal radiological outcome, but he has got a poor results both by constant as well as the dash score. So statistically, we asked why there was the problem in those patients. It was found that by all these regressive analysis, they found greater tuberosity articular factor was the one fragment, but all of us know that it is a factor. And also, if you look at the dash score and the constant score, we wanted to divide who made the difference, and it was those who had a good range of movements. If there was more than 90 degree of movement, they made the difference in complete patient satisfaction. So in a review of literature, there is no reported literature on the technique that we have described, no reported literature comparing the function to the radiological parameters. And then on further evaluation of the literature, we found that the rotator cuff was one of the problem in these patients. So in our group, we had younger patients, men were more, and then there was excellent outcome. But one of the point we had to make was the 10 of them who had a normal radiological outcome had a poor results. So in conclusion, the indirect reduction and technique gives a very good result. It's a safe and excellent technique. Avascular necrosis is minimal. And then also, because the functional outcome is good, and what decides is the 90 degree movement and above. If they had more than 90 degree movement, patients were satisfied, and then greater tuberosity plays role. In indirect reduction and technique, though we are giving a full prominence to the radiological outcome, what's important is that we need to go beyond and look for the integrity of these cuff. That is the final conclusion from our study. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for nice presentation in time. Now proximal humerus fracture is open for discussion.
The video was not working in this, yeah. What we do is we go through the, we do the deltopectoral approach. After that, no soft tissue is disturbed. Only through the fracture site where if you see the shaft would have cut out like that, there will be a small break you will see in the soft tissue. Through that, use the Schwann screws and hold the other fragments. The head fragment you can hold, get it into the joint, and then the tuberosities you would see it behind that is posteriorly, superiorly displaced. You just have a bite of the ethibond stitch and bring it anteriorly, and the lesser tuberosity you will see have a stitch and then bring it together. So you don't disturb any soft tissues underneath. Only one was with avascular necrosis. In a published literature, 3 to 4 part fractures, the avascular necrosis, 4 part goes up to 30% of patients can have avascular necrosis. That is the beauty of this technique. Indirect reduction, when you do, if you don't disturb any of the soft tissues, then there is a good chance that it doesn't end up with avian. It is also true with any of the conservative management. If you do a 4 part fracture with a conservative management in elderly, if you see that there won't be in majority of them will not end up with the avian. The initial insult is by the injury. Yeah. The initial insult is by the injury, and then as long as we don't disturb that much, this head fragment is more or less as an osteoarticular fragment. So it generally heals. It is not like a femoral head. It is not like a weight-bearing bone. It is a non-weight-bearing bone. majority of them will survive. Weight bearing immediately starts them to collapse quickly, and then that's why we see more often in a hip joint rather than in a proximal humerus.
Yes, last question.
Varus is only by the technique. During surgery only we can prevent. After that, suppose if you don't have a calcar screw, that is in a philosophy you have the medial calcar screw. If it is not holding very well, then there is a possibility it can still go in for varus in a further subsequent X-rays.
Yes, Ajmani, please.
Did you analyze the pattern extension of his question? Pattern of injury, how many were the high velocity injury fractures and how many were low velocity?
See, this is a series I specifically took up to 75 years of age, purely because up to that age, our bone quality, we presume it is very good, and all of them were of fall where there is a 3 and 4, where I found it to be high velocity injuries.
They were high or low?
High velocity injuries.
Fall is high velocity.
No. Fall means like road. If you see, all our injuries were road traffic accidents. So, no, if the in a Resch mechanism, Resch was the one who pioneered about varus and valgus. If there is a valgus positioning, the vascularity remains intact. Whereas if it is a varus positioning, invariably there will be a metaphyseal breakage. So that will lead to avian. No. Ours was equally 57 were in valgus group, 53 were in varus. And then 30% of them had a medial combination. So there was no bias in this study. What determined in this, what I presume in this study is that if you can get a good achievement, see, 111 of them in 127 patients, we could achieve a good reduction. If you can achieve a good reduction with the length, then it definitely gives a good result.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, last question.
Sir, it is only I do it in very elderly group where they have more comorbidities. This group does not have. Yeah, those beyond 75 years I excluded here. Yeah. No.
Okay, last paper, Dr. Ghanshyam Khare.
Good afternoon, everybody. I bring greetings to all of you from the holy city of Varanasi, and the topic is management of pulseless hand, which is pink, after supracondylar fractures of the humerus in children using steroids and plaster slab. This is the treatment of persistent pink pulseless hand after supracondylar fracture of humerus in children is controversial. Early revascularization has a high rate of asymptomatic reocclusion and residual stenosis. So failure rate after reconstruction is very high. And therefore, revascularization should be done only if there is a deteriorating nerve function or persistent severe pain, even after 12 hours of injury. In India, in small peripheral hospitals, facilities for vascular surgeries are not available. So we have to tackle all these problems. Patients are too poor, they come often late, and they cannot go to higher centers to get the vascular surgeries done. So what to do in such cases? Now, this is all because of poverty, ignorance. They cannot go to higher centers. Most of the surgeons use fasciotomy. These patients who are having supracondylar fractures and pulseless hand, they are often having tight forearm, and the compartment pressure is often high in such cases. And most of the surgeons, they will like to do fasciotomy in such cases. To manage the compartment syndrome, we developed our own technique of using steroids, which is published in Indian Journal of Orthopedics. We use that for leg compartment syndrome, and same principles we used here. We do not do fasciotomy. We rather use steroids for treating compartment syndrome. So this is a prospective study of 26 children who presented with pink pulseless hand after supracondylar fracture of the humerus. Our follow-up ranges from 2 to 8 years. 24 fractures were closed and 2 were open. All the patients with closed fractures were treated by closed manipulation of the fractures and plaster slab application in full pronation, because pronation prevents cubitus varus deformity in supracondylar fractures. The patient with open fractures were treated with debridement, and they were fixed with true Kirschner wires. We measure the compartment pressure of the forearm in our patients using Whiteside's technique. This is a simple method which can be used even in small peripheral hospitals. And 15 patients had raised compartmental pressure out of these, and remaining were at borderline. This is the technique. We use a syringe, and blood pressure instrument is available in every hospital, so we can connect this 3-way cannula to BP instrument, and another tube goes to the forearm. So Whiteside's technique is a simple technique, and it can be used even in the primary health centers also. So we measured compartment pressure using this. If the radial pulse did not return after closed reduction, we used CT angiography of the limb, and despite of the block, if the hand was pink and perfused and the reduction was satisfactory, then the plaster slab was continued for 3 to 4 weeks. Even despite of block in the vessels, because patients often come late and vascular surgeons are not available. Even at my institution, in the middle of the night, no vascular surgeon is available in the Banaras University to come and repair the vessel. So we managed these children conservatively and followed their results. We used prednisolone 10 milligram thrice a day for 3 days to prevent and treat compartment syndrome and reduce edema, so that collateral circulation could develop better in a better way. The patients were admitted in the ward and kept under observation for about a week. At the end of the week, if the check X-rays were satisfactory, his hand was good, the patients were discharged, and they were called in OPD for follow-up at weekly interval. The slab was removed after 3 to 4 weeks, and the exercises were started. The patients were called at monthly intervals to assess the range of motion and condition of blood supply till the limb became perfectly normal. Out of 26 patients, 18 were male and 8 females, and the left elbow was involved in 15 children. 10 patients sustained injuries due to fall from height, 8 sustained due to fall during playing, 4 sustained injuries due to fall from carrier of the cycle, and 4 had injuries due to road traffic accidents. In 13 cases, the pulse returned after closed reduction of the severely displaced fractures, which were grade 3. So once they presented, the pulse was not felt, but after reduction, the pulse reappeared in the children. So we did not submit them for angiography. A POP slab was applied in the children in pronation, and these were treated in the usual way. The remaining 13, where pulse did not return after reduction, we are subjected to CT angiography. We have got 64 slice CT scan in our institution. A block in the brachial artery was demonstrated in all these patients. And as the reduction after closed manipulation and plaster slab application was satisfactory and hand was pink, well perfused, we continued the plaster slab without any vascular surgery. We used prednisolone 10 milligram thrice a day for 3 days to prevent compartment syndrome. None of our cases had progressively deteriorating nerve function or persistent severe pain after 12 hours of injury. So there is no consensus regarding treatment of pink pulseless hand after supracondylar fractures of the humerus. Some surgeons say that one should wait and watch if the hand is pink and capillary circulation is maintained, while according to others, revascularization should be done as soon as possible. However, the results of early revascularization are not always good, as it has a high rate of asymptomatic reocclusion and residual stenosis. By doing surgical interventions, we may further damage the remaining collateral vessels. Therefore, surgical intervention and vascular surgery should be done only if there is deteriorating nerve function or persistent severe pain even after 12 hours. Because there are good collateral anastomosis around the elbow, it takes care of the blood supply. Major damage is caused by the compartment syndrome, which develops after the supracondylar fracture in these cases. We have developed our new method of treating them using steroids rather than fasciotomy. And corticosteroids, they cause chemical decompression at the cellular level. They work in a much better way rather than fasciotomy. And fasciotomy does not decrease cellular edema, rather it increases. Many patients require amputation even after fasciotomy. Therefore, fasciotomy should go obsolete according to us. I never use fasciotomy in any of my patients in compartment syndrome. So all our patients recovered full function of the limb and eventually, and radial pulse repaired in 8 cases after 3 weeks and in 5 cases after 6 weeks. According to Flynn's criteria, results were excellent in 15, good in 10, and fair in 1 case. It is concluded that most of the pink pulseless hands after supracondylar fracture of the humerus can be managed conservatively. There are plenty of arterial anastomosis around the elbow, and we used glucocorticosteroids. Here you can see different vessels which they anastomose. There are radial collateral artery, ulnar collateral artery, recurrent arteries which are going up from the radius, ulna, anteriorly, posteriorly. So even if the major brachial artery is damaged, all these vessels, if they function well, they can take care of the circulation. Gradually, these vessels, they will enlarge. They will enlarge in caliber and they will supply adequate blood to the limb. In due course, they will hypertrophy. So these are some of the cases. This was even in open fractures. We had 2 open fractures where even some collateral might be damaged. The limb survived. You can see the complete damage in the brachial artery, and this patient had full recovery. This is the child. His fracture has healed and his limb is well. This is another open case. And you can see the brachial artery is completely blocked. This child also managed conservatively by plaster slab in pronation, and this child also had full recovery. So thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Dr. Khare. The paper is open for discussion. Supracondylar fracture with pulseless hand.
Well, you said the pulseless hand is the pink perfusion comes in the hand, and you have done the CT, you have found the block, and you have not done anything for brachial artery. What is the medical legal importance of these type of cases if it goes into gangrene?
Well, we took informed consent. We informed the parents that we do not have facilities for vascular surgery. They can take the patient to any Werter center, and then we treated them with plaster slab. I am not a medical legal expert, so I can't tell. But no, but I have explained the patient that we do not have these facilities with me in my hospital. So what can I do? Whatever.
That doesn't absolve you of responsibility.
Referring.
Responsibility to send them to a better center. Okay, I have questions. Okay, the pink hand in literature also they say you may observe these patients after reduction, and if perfusion is good, you may treat them without steroids. So, do you have any comparative study where you have a group where you are not given steroids and you are given steroids?
No, I have given steroids to all my patients because I didn't want to take any risk.
The result would have been same if you got
Given or not given?
I have not done.
you non-steroidal anti-inflammatory and elevate the limb.
And the amount of steroid is very less. It is 10 mg TDS for 3 days.
Yes, it is very less. Does not cause any side effects.
Yes.
Yes, further studies are required to answer all these questions. My study is very small, I agree. And we are still continuing the work. In future, we may be able to answer this question, whether giving steroid is better or not giving. But I didn't want to take any risk in the child. If there's edema, pressure is raised, I want to decrease the pressure. And steroid is the best, most potent anti-inflammatory drug in our hand is steroid. Some of them are already having compartment syndrome. Yes. Yes, yes, we gave to them also. Yes, 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 yes. Many surgeons, they give chimeral fort and anti-inflammatory drugs to decrease edema, but I prefer steroids because it is the most potent anti-inflammatory drug available in our hand.
What
And,
is the opinion of House regarding the medical legal issue in such cases?
Chairman can enlighten us.
Of course, I will be happy to hand him over and see his results. What are his results? I'll be happy to hand him over and study the case. What are the because what literature says the reocclusion rates are very high. Already people have done vascular anastomosis in such cases, and the literature says more than 50% cases they get reocclusion. The anastomosis does not work, which the surgeon does.
How can you say somewhere in already in compartment? You have not mentioned that there are pain on passive extension of the finger.
Instead of giving glucocorticoids, you have low molecular dextran and lipoic acid which improves or lightens circulation. Why did you use?
No, they will not decrease cellular edema. I want to decrease the cellular edema, which is causing swelling and compartment syndrome.
Cause any problem. Even if you give a 30 milligrams carton white is on, it does not make any difference. For your satisfaction, you have given all the drugs.
Yeah.
Okay? You can give it Dextran, you can give it Rectal, whatever you want, you can give it. But problem is not that, problem is a medical legal.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Khare. In court of law, but you have to refer it or send the patient to the higher center.
No, but if patient doesn't want to go, he cannot go. Suppose he can, they come late to us also, sir. From villages they will come
What is in literature?
and they say, you do whatever best you can.
Whenever there is compartment syndrome, for steroid to act orally, take 3 days. Why don't you do pressure to immediately decompress?
No, it doesn't take 3 days. It doesn't take 3 days. No, we give orally for 3 days. Initially, we can give injectable hydrocortisone. We can give 100 milligram.
Actually, this is the best thing.
We are keeping in flexion and pronation. No, it will not compromise the circulation. Pardon? No, we have not done post-reduction angiography. We have done only to demonstrate that there is a arterial block. Because patients have to pay in our institution, and so they don't agree. Once the hand is all right, even they will not come for follow-up.
Dr. Ajmani and Dr. Thakkar, any opinion regarding the medical legal issue?
I think you should write it on their paper and send them to the nearest possible center where vascular surgeons are available round the clock, rather than taking such a high risk.
See, it definitely have a medical legal importance. If you found the pulse is not there.
Yes, sir.
If you don't have the vascular, please refer to a higher center. Don't burn your fingers and hands like
Nowadays, yes.
nowadays. Things are very bad with the doctors, you know. And even if he says, no, I cannot, you take in black and white, you take the two consents from two opinion from the other orthopedic surgeon that yes, this needs a referral, but the patient is not willing to go on higher center as per the treating and consequences are to
Absolutely with you, sir.
proper method for doing cases, any case.
Thank you, Khare sir.
Thank you.
We have a nice discussion. And now it's time for next session, free paper session. And chairman is Dr. G.N. Khare and Dr. Rama Avatar.
Thank you. We are thankful to the judges.
Sir, thank you, sir.